And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is March the 12th, 71st day of the year. Just 294 days remain to this year is over with. Holidays observances. We're on Kidney Day. Those amazing filters work tirelessly in our bodies like nature's purifiers. National Plant a Flower Day. International Awareness Day for Avoidable Deaths. And World Glaucoma Day. National Baked Scallops Day. National Girl Scout Day. Those little entrepreneurs teach young girls essential skills such as business and leadership and how to sell a whole lot of cookies. International School Meals Day, Alloimmunization and HDFN Day, exploring the intricate dance of immune responses. Woody Bond orchestrates a fascinating defense against certain challenges. World Day Against Cyber Censorship, Alfred Hitchcock Day, excuse me, Popcorn Lovers Day, National Working Moms Day, juggling careers and parenting, moms thrive, showcasing resilience and ambition and in balancing acts that redefine success and multitasking. Adelaide Fringe, National Groundwater Awareness Week, Brain Awareness Week. And of course, it's Pi Week, 3.1415. But more importantly, when you go to your favorite restaurant on the 14th, that's Saturday, don't you know? Tell them you came for that piece of pie for $3.14. Make Mine Chocolate, World Glaucoma Day, Sleep Awareness Week, Girl Scout Week, Universal Women's Week, Campfire USA Birthday Week, Healthcare HR Week, National Bubblegum Week, Catholic Sisters Week, Patient Safety Awareness Week, National Science and Engineering Week, National MS Awareness Week, National Green Week, Endometriosis Awareness Week, that affects millions of women around the world. Endometriosis is a debilitating condition that requires compassion and effective treatment. Pulmonary Rehabilitation Week, helping individuals breathe better. National Aardvark Week. And of course, we're still in Ramadan, the Muslim holy month, where the Muslims fast from sunrise to sunset. Famous people born in the state: Liza Minnelli, Ron Jeremy, and Mitt Romney, the man who would be president. Well, on that note, let's see what stories we have in the news, because there's always something going on. Well, Iran's drone swarms challenge U.S. air defenses as troops in the Middle East face rising threats. Cheap Iranian drone attacks are forcing the Pentagon to rapidly expand layered air defenses in the Middle East. Thousands of troops stationed across that region face an escalating aerial threat that's testing the limits of traditional missile defenses. United Arab Emirates said Tuesday its air defenses have detected 9 ballistic missiles and 35 drones launched by Iran. 8 missiles were intercepted and 1 fell into the sea. Of the 35 drones, 25 were shot down and 9 crashed on UAE soil, according to the country. Engagement highlights how the battlefield is shifting. Ballistic missiles travel high and fast and allows long-range interceptors such as the Patriot Air Defense System and the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System to engage them predictably. Drone swarms, though, which Iran increasingly has relied on in recent exchanges, present a different challenge to U.S. forces. They fly lower, move slower, and often arrive in clusters, making them harder to detect and more likely to strain defenses built for high-speed threats. U.S. troops already have been directly affected by one-way attack drones in the region. In a March 1st strike near Camp Arifan in Kuwait, 6 American service members were killed and dozens wounded when a aerial drone hit a tactical operations center. Each interception also carries a cost. High-end missile interceptors can run into millions of dollars per shot. Many of the drones they're designed to defeat are far cheaper and produced in large numbers, creating what defense officials are describing as a growing math problem in modern warfare. The U.S. can end up firing expensive missiles at relatively inexpensive drones, a dynamic that has become harder to sustain if the attacks come in waves, as many of them do. Well, the Senate GOP is playing the blame game as Trump-backed SAVE Act heads for defeat. Senate Republicans know that Trump-backed voter ID registration is doomed to fail and are trying to find a way to pin the blame on the Senate Democrats. Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, plans to bring the bill to the floor next week, but Republicans won't take the route of launching into a talking filibuster to fight pressure from President Trump and the GOP base to do just that. We don't have the votes either to proceed, get on a talking filibuster, or to sustain one if we got on it, according to Thune. That's just a function of math. There ain't anything I can do about that. I mean, I understand the president's got a passion to see this issue addressed, and as we all do. You know, the Democrats are determined if you can manage to get on the soil of this country, you should be allowed to vote. It's just absolutely insane. And while the end result after an exhaustive marathon of debate would allow Republicans to pass the Safeguarding American Voter Eligibility or the SAVE Act as a simple majority threshold, Thune has time and again warned that the votes aren't there among Republicans to block the Democrats' amendments that can completely reshape the bill. Well, CNN's Abby Phillip issues an on-air correction, says she takes full responsibility for the Mamdani flub. CNN host Abby Phillips issued an on-air correction Wednesday night for her comment about the ISIS-inspired terror attack in New York City last weekend, after offering a mea culpa on social media earlier in the day. She said, "This morning I issued a correction first thing on the morning on X for a mistake that I made on last night's show, but I also wanted to do so on the air as well," she told viewers. And correctly said that the bombs that were thrown by ISIS-inspired suspects in New York City over the weekend were directed at Mayor Mamdani. They were not. I failed to catch and correct that mistake in real time, and I take full responsibility for that. And while we do make mistakes, it's important to acknowledge and correct those errors when they actually happen, she said. Well, she issued an apology on X after she had gone viral for falsely claiming the attempted terrorist attack was against New York City Mayor. Notably, during her program Tuesday night, CNN political commentator Ana Navarro repeated the falsehood, which was corrected by Republican panelist Joe Borelli. Well, Virginia GOP has flipped a deep blue county seat after the Democrats rocked by resurfaced a racist post. Virginia Democrat have refused calls from prominent party leaders to drop out of the Prince William County supervisor race over racist social media post was projected to lose his bid, handing Republicans a pickup in the Washington suburbs. The defeat followed public rebukes from several top state and local Democrats who said Mohammed Sef Kassim had disqualified himself and urged him to step aside. Kassim remained in the race, though, saying the stakes were too high to withdraw. Republican realtor Jean LaCroix was poised to win the Woodbridge district seat, making a Republican gain in a county that's tended Democrat in recent years. Once William County, once a conservative stronghold during the Obama era, became known nationally for hardline immigration policies before shifting left alongside Northern Virginia's suburban growth. Well, we'll see if that trend continues. 6 reported Bigfoot sightings in northeastern Ohio within 4 days spark a cryptid flap speculation. A series of social media posts from the cryptid-focused podcast has ignited speculation about widespread Bigfoot sightings northeastern Ohio, with enthusiasts pointing to what they described as a concentrated burst of activity. And, of course, shortly we shall hear from the Democratic Party that Bigfoot should be allowed to vote. They're here. Bigfoot Society, a podcast and online community dedicated to collecting eyewitness accounts of Sasquatch encounters, says that it received 6 separate reports between March 6th and March 10th in wooded areas near Mantua and Garrettsville, southeast of Cleveland. The group has described a cluster as a possible flap, a term used in cryptozoology for multiple sightings within a short time frame. It's normal for there to be Bigfoot sightings over the U.S., but it's not normal to have multiple sightings in a small area within a short number of days, according to Jeremiah Byron, a host of the Bigfoot Society podcast. According to summaries shared by the organization, the reported encounters included one on March 6th. A witness saw a brown, approximately 9-foot-tall figure outdoors. March 7th, a reported brown, 8-foot-tall figure along with alleged footprints and deep grunts. March 9th, a reported black 8-foot-tall figure. Also on March 9th, a separate account of a black 10-foot-tall figure said to be accompanied by a heavily musky odor. March 9th, I also saw a witness report seeing a brown, roughly 6-foot-tall figure from about 100 feet away through a window. And on March 10th, an account describing an 8 to 10-foot-tall large black shadow said not to resemble a bear. Social media post, the Bigfoot Society urged residents in Portage County to pay attention, suggesting that something's moving through the corridor. Well, Washington parents are demanding action and answers after a teacher's allegedly raped a student on school grounds. Washington parents are demanding answers after a 62-year-old physical education teacher and athletic director at Skykomish K-12 school was arrested Friday on suspicion of sexually abusing a student for more than a year. Records obtained by Fox News show a Washington state man was booked March 6th by the King County Sheriff's Office during the investigation into the rape of a child. Fox News is not naming the individual because he hasn't been formally charged yet. King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office said on Tuesday that not to receive the case, but expects it Wednesday from the Sheriff's Office for a charging decision. Well, we're seeing more and more of that. Senate's going to take a test vote to end the 27-day DHS shutdown. DHS funding lapse began March 14 due to congressional stalemates over immigration policies. As I said, the Democrats are adamant that if you can get here, you should be able to vote. Doesn't make any difference if you're citizens or not. The lapse entered its 27th day on Thursday as many DHS employees continue to work without pay. Over 300 airport security officers have left to the TSA since the start of the DHS shutdown, according to a TSA official. The tempers are flaring in the Senate as DHS shutdown debate erupts. The stalemate just digs deeper and deeper. And this is, we can thank Chuck Schumer for another edition of the Schumer Shutdown. Well, a deep-sea treasure hunter has been freed after a decade behind bars for refusing to reveal the location of gold. Tommy Thompson, a deep-sea explorer, spent more than 10 years in federal custody refusing to disclose the location of a cache of gold coins from a historic shipwreck, was released from prison. He's 73, walked out of a federal correctional facility Wednesday after a judge ruled that his continued incarceration had lost its coercive effect. 10 years is enough, don't you think? For the better part of 10 years, he remained behind bars, asserting that a lapse in memory regarding the whereabouts of 500 missing gold coins recovered from the SS Central America, a ship of gold that sank in 1857 off the coast of South Carolina. He said, Your Honor, I don't know if we've gone over this road before or not, but I don't know the whereabouts of the gold, he told the judge in 2020. I feel like I don't have the keys to my freedom. Thompson's downfall began long after his 1988 triumph when he used a robotic treasure to recover gold from the Atlantic floor. And while that discovery was a feat of engineering, it sparked a series of lawsuits from investors who funded the expedition and insurance companies claiming rights to the treasure. Yes, somebody's always willing to claim the rights after somebody else does the work. Well, former Prince Andrew's ex-assistant emerges as a key witness in the investigation. Former Prince Andrew's ex-assistant, Charlotte Manley, is a key witness who may shed valuable light into Andrew's dealings and activities from when he was the UK's trade envoy. That's according to British broadcaster and photographer Helena Chard. Chard said that the Manley, who served as Andrew's private secretary and treasurer from 2001 to 2003, was his assistant private secretary and treasurer from 1996, is the talk of the town. Manley told the Times in London they found her at her home in the UK. She'd be willing to talk to police about her time with the former Duke of York. She said, "I'd rather talk to the police and the press, but not that I would have much to tell them," she said. Well, Manley often went with Andrew on his frequent trips abroad when he served as the UK's special representative for trade and investment starting in 2001. Chard added that those connected to Andrew Mountbatten Windsor are feeling increasingly public expectation and pressure to come forward. And Manley's been called a dutiful British citizen. Operation Ironville, the name given to Andrew's investigation, in full swing, Chard explained. Manley's a key witness and rather be hounded by the press. She's made it clear she prefers to talk with the police. Well, it looks like Andrew's life has been turned upside down and is continuing for his involvement with Epstein. Well, the former Camelot to outsider JFK's grandson shakes up New York City House race, taking aim at gatekeeping Democratic machine. Jack Schlossberg, the only grandson of former President John F. Kennedy, is running for Congress in New York City, where he says, despite being a member of an arguably the most prominent political family in American history, he's heading an outsider campaign that's upsetting the political establishment power brokers. He said, "It's probably hard for people to believe me saying I'm an anti-establishment outsider given my family's ties, but in this race, I really am. I'm going up against a political machine here in New York 12 that doesn't want change, doesn't want any outsiders to come shake things up and do things differently. They want to control the people they send to Congress, and that means trading favors and endorsements before the seats have been opened up. Dozen Democrats are running in the June primary to replace Democratic Congressman Jerry Nadler, who announced his retirement in September to age 78 after more than 30 years in Congress, citing the need for generational change in the party. That's part of the problem with a lot of these elected congressmen. They get elected and stay forever. Sometimes they look like they're just being propped up. They really don't do anything but sit and stare. Now, the mere fact that Schlossberg is the grandson of JFK is really not a ringing endorsement, but that does give him some skin in the game. Nancy Mace says she jumped in to assist as Americans airlifted from the war zone amid Iran conflict. White House Republicans have gathered in South Florida to map out their strategy ahead of November's midterm elections. One GOP lawmaker said she jumped in to assist with evacuation efforts overseas and amid the U.S.-Israeli conflict with Iran. Nancy Mace, a Republican of South Carolina, told Fox News she traveled to the Middle East on Sunday after she learned a South Carolina family was trapped in the wake of the conflict. When your people are stranded in a war zone, the only answer worthy of the office, worthy of our state, worthy of our country is to get them out. She's running to be South Carolina's next governor, according to a statement. After that family made it safely back to South Carolina, she says she stayed in the region and partnered with Gray Bull Rescue, a Tampa-based crisis response group led by military veterans, to evacuate more Americans. Tens of thousands of U.S. citizens have scrambled to leave the Middle East after the widespread flight cancellations and airspace closures due to Iranian counterstrikes. Well, the first grade students who was disciplined over Black Lives Matter drawing does have free speech rights, according to the court. Federal Appeals Court ruled Tuesday that elementary school students have First Amendment protections, reviving a lawsuit brought on behalf of a South Carolina first grader who was allegedly punished after giving a drawing to a classmate. In that decision, a three-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals vacated the U.S. District Judge David Carter's grant of summary judgment to the defendants and sent the case back for further proceedings. Well, unfortunately, the liberals are running the education system for the most part, and that does cause a lot of problems. A GOP billionaire candidate, trying to woo Trump's support in a key Georgia race, bankrolled his 2024 presidential rivals. One of the top Republican contenders for governor of Georgia hyped that he'd be Trump's favorite governors and vying for President Trump's endorsement, but his Federal Election Commission records show he financially backed multiple GOP rivals of Trump during the 2024 presidential race. In particular, two top contenders, Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones and billionaire healthcare entrepreneur Rick Jackson, have been sparring over who's more in line with Trump. This primary election is very simple, Jones said in his campaign website. There's one authentic conservative who's fought for Trump. Meanwhile, Jackson's assured voters he'd be Trump's favorite governor after donating $1 million to the president's political action committee, MAGA Inc., less than 2 months before he jumped in the race last month. But Jackson and his network of companies and investment groups have a history of donating funds to Trump's rivals, including during his 2024 presidential bid prior to him obtaining the Republican Party nomination. That's according to a Fox News review of FEC filings. Jackson gave at least $150,000 to Nikki Haley and $100,000 to Vivek Ramaswamy, who were both running against Trump at the time. Well, being endorsed by Trump is not a magic wand, but it does sway a lot of voters. Well, there's a woman allegedly touched passengers' faces and then punched an elderly traveler during a Caribbean flight. Caribbean getaway turned into a mid-air nightmare Monday when an Alabama woman allegedly went berserk on a pair of seniors, forcing the flight to make an emergency diversion. Ebony Shertera Harper, a 31-year-old standing just 4'11", is trading her airplane seat for a jail cell after a disagreement turned into a fistfight at 30,000 feet. Chaos kicked off on Frontier Flight 2089 from Luis Munoz Marin International Airport in Puerto Rico to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport as the plane cruised toward the mainland. According to an arrest affidavit reviewed by Fox News, Harper was headed to the back of the aircraft to use the restroom and ended up getting way too close for comfort, with a fellow passenger identified as Jimmy Lee Baker. Witnesses say Harper leaned her body right into Baker, who was sitting on the very last row. And when Baker asked the Alabama woman to move her arm off his back, things really got out of hand. Instead of apologizing, Harper reached out and began touching Baker's face with her hands, and that's when his wife, identified as Lakeisha Baker, stepped in. And Lord, did we not have a fight. Well, at that note, we're going to go to today's show. It's interesting to note that even in the 21st century, there are folks who believe in magic. And some of those people are in the CIA, don't you know? We're going to be talking about finishing up our story about MKOften. It began as an offshoot, an experimental backroom file attached to a broader behavioral science study. Officially, it fell under the purview of the Office of Research and Development. Unofficially, it became a net thrown into the occult. Recruitment started quietly. A Brooklyn medium known for her trance work is brought in under the cover of academic collaboration. She was told she was assisting with a psychological profile of altered consciousness. In truth, they wanted to see how long she could remain in a trance without losing motor control. Then there was a West Coast warlock who had once been arrested for conducting goat sacrifices in a public park. He was flown to Virginia under an alias and paid in unmarked cash. Spent 3 days describing rituals said to summon spirits of fire and plague. The officers who listened didn't flinch. They wanted diagrams. And then came the astrologers. One by one, they added to the payroll, not for predictions, but for patterns. Could they help decode enemy behavior? Were there fluctuations in mood and chaos and geopolitical escalation that aligned with celestial movement? Of course, there were a lot of quacks in the mixture. Others were unnervingly convincing. One woman who had a waist-length silver hair and a Swiss passport correctly predicted the sudden death of a Pakistani diplomat 5 days before it happened. She attributed it to Mars ingress and unresolved ancestral karma. The agency didn't care what she called it. They increased her pay and moved her to a secure compound in Maryland. Reports began to accumulate, carefully labeled, distributed under tight clearance. I talked about some of the subjects yesterday. Subject 026A claimed clairvoyant insight into classified troop movements in Laos. Had 71% accuracy, don't you know? Subject 094B participated in a dream incubation study. Produced sketches of Soviet launch sites before any official satellite images were available. Subject 310F refused to enter the facility, said something dark's watching through your eyes. Deemed unstable, later reassigned to what was called passive observation. Now, none of it made any sense, but the patterns did emerge. And even though the CIA started it, the Army got involved quietly. They had their own interests: force enhancement, psychic mapping, psychological resistance. Project officers from Fort Meade began attending sessions dressed in civilian clothes. And they asked questions like, can pain be transferred through symbols? Can fear be harvested? Well, the sessions grew stranger. When I was still on active duty, I heard about some of this. There were apparently several projects. In one test, a group of 5 psychics were isolated in soundproof chambers and instructed to sense the contents of sealed boxes held in a separate building. Now, the results were mixed, of course, statistically inconclusive, but one subject, a man who spoke in tongues during sleep, began drawing symbols that matched ancient Babylonian glyphs. Nobody could explain it. CIA brought in a comparative religion professor from Princeton. He didn't have any answers either. 1974, MKOften become less an operation, more a seance of national security. The boundaries between science and superstition blurred beneath their weight of secrecy. Inside a secure warehouse in Arlington, a special team of analysts cataloged the daily reports, each stamped with phrases like unverifiable and anomalous correlation or further inquiry required. Some were dismissed as just simple nonsense. Others were marked actionable in red ink. Meanwhile, those at the top of this project kept their distance. Deputy Director of Plans referred to MKOften as that metaphysical sideshow, but he never shut it down. Because what if the Russians were getting results? What if magic in some twisted way worked? It wasn't belief that sustained the program. It was fear being out-imagined. By 1975, the meetings had moved deeper underground. Figurative, literally. One particular session conducted in the sublevel of a nondescript office building in Roslyn, Virginia, involved a circle of 8 individuals seated around a black painted table. No windows, only dim red lighting and a lingering scent of ozone. None of these people wore uniforms. Nobody introduced themselves. The names used in reports were codes, mostly letters paired with astrological signs, such as T Aquarius and L Scorpio and M Cancer. Gave the whole thing a ritualistic sheen like a zodiacal war room. On the table sat a laminated sheet with 2 questions. Can symbolic ritual influence behavior remotely? And what are the measurable effects of belief on physical systems? Now, these are what the questions asked by men at war. They're the questions of men trying to decode faith like a cipher. MKOften had mutated. What began as defensive intelligence gathering and spiraled into something else. An exploratory tuned into the irrational. CIA, in its unrelenting search for control, had begun collaborating with people who barely believed in reality is fixed. Agency brought in astrologers to brief on decision-making patterns of foreign leaders. Birth charts are quietly drafted for heads of state, Brezhnev and Castro and even Nixon. One operative was assigned the task of cross-referencing lunar phases with declassified KGB sabotage incidents. It became known half-jokingly as lunacy analysis. Now, the results, of course, were not consistent, but that didn't stop them. In a hotel suite in downtown Manhattan, rented under a fake university name, the agency held what later be called a multimodal esoteric convergence test. 3 witches, a ceremonial magician, a self-described Luciferian priest were asked to perform rituals simultaneously. In different cities with synchronized timing, the goal was to produce a measurable disruption in the brain waves of a test subject under EEG observation at a secure facility. The ritual involved blood and mirrors and invocations in Latin. The subject, a young man with a history of disassociation, began to seize 7 minutes after the coordinated start time. Doctor present recorded it as a coincidence. The priest later claimed it was proof. And from that point, the chaos widened. Internal memos surfaced proposing research into spiritual residue at the sites of historic violence. A plan was sketched to deploy sensitives to Gettysburg and My Lai. The language grew stranger. One document mentioned spectral topography, theory that human suffering leaves behind a vibrational footprint that can be mapped, even used. Budget lines appeared for crystal acquisition for symbolic geometry consultants, for rare grimoires brought from European collectors under diplomatic immunity. One memo, marked confidential, offline only, described the meeting with Anton LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan. That briefing claimed LaVey had psychological insights of high potential utility and unorthodox but well-structured models of human motivation. Now, he was never officially under contract, apparently, but somebody kept reading his books and sending them to Fort Detrick. At the Army Chemical Corps facility, a lieutenant colonel named Jack Pruitt began testing what he called suggestibility chambers. These were small, soundproof rooms filled with magnetic fields, flashing lights, and whispered mantras played on a loop. The subjects, volunteers from local colleges, reported visions and panic attacks, sometimes total blackouts. There were no drugs involved, allegedly. No hypnosis, just environmental pressure and symbolism. Pruitt wrote in one of his journals, I think we're rewiring belief. It's not about whether demons exist, it's about whether somebody thinks they do and what that does to the body. Simon Langley began to worry. Project head started requesting psychological evaluation for field officers assigned to MKOften. A few had begun using tarot cards to make decisions in daily operations. One senior analyst refused to enter briefing rooms during a Mercury retrograde. Another was caught sacrificing a chicken in a garage in Arlington. When asked why he was doing it, he said, I'm protecting the building. Well, the lines were blurring, not just between science and superstition, but between intelligence and madness. The Oversight Committee, barely aware of the project's real scope, grew uneasy. But MKOften was cleverly compartmentalized, officially remained a small behavioral science initiative, had low visibility, low funding, high secrecy. Unofficially, though, it had become a laboratory of the altered reality. They weren't just studying occultists anymore, they were becoming them. The question was no longer whether psychic warfare was possible, it's whether the people running the war could still tell what was real and what wasn't. Well, the end didn't come with a scandal or a spotlight. No hearings, no outraged editorials, no whistleblowers stepping into fluorescent newsrooms with folders full of classified evidence. MKOften simply vanished, like a ritual never meant to be remembered. One morning in early 1976, a man at Langley walked into an office, found a drawer empty, and understood the door had been closed. Well, at this point, what remained were just fragments. Some were buried in budget spreadsheets, vague references to behavioral contingency support, and symbolic systems research. Others lingered in the personal journals of analysts who had spent too long peering into the abyss, trying to divine patterns from chaos. But the official files, those with names and coordinates and protocols, were all gone, burned or buried, probably both. One declassified memo years later would mention interdepartmental concerns about destabilization of operative rationality. One sentence that said everything without admitting anything. At that point in time, nobody wanted to ask too many questions. The Cold War had actually entered a new phase. Satellites hummed above every continent. Computers replaced mediums. The language of intelligence returned to code and calculus. But some who'd touched the edges of MKOften couldn't quite forget what they'd seen. In the quiet quarters of post-MK Ultra counterintelligence, there was a new superstition. One never written, never formalized, but passed in hushes and sidelong glances. They called it the residue, kind of spiritual static left behind by the project. Dreams didn't feel like dreams. Equipment malfunctions that defied explanation. People who were never the same after reading too many reports in too short a time. One technician years later would describe waking up at 3:33 every morning for 27 nights in a row, always to the sound of static, even when the room was silent. He stopped sleeping, eventually even stopped speaking. Maybe we ought to send some of our congressmen there. Outside the agency, whispered lingered. The fringe community of ex-intelligence hobbyists began to piece together what little they could. Fragments of memos, redacted invoices, offhand remarks, and memories. In online forums, obscure zines, MKOften became a legend. Some said it was a smokescreen, a diversion. Others believed it had succeeded so completely it had been absorbed into black budget operations we no longer had names for. And then there were those who believed something darker. MKOften had opened something that couldn't close. Beneath the experiments and the seances or rituals, something ancient had been invited in. Not a demon exactly, but a system, a pattern of thought, a way of seeing the world where fear became currency, belief became weaponized, and the boundary between truth and hallucination dissolved into usable fabric. One former Army psychologist, speaking under a pseudonym, once described it. He said, "You spend long enough trying to weaponize belief, it doesn't matter if it's astrology, Satanism, or whatever, you eventually start believing in the weapon. And once you believe in it, it starts believing back." He died in 1999. No cause of death was ever released. The legacy of MKOften is a ghost trail. And yes, MKOften was a real project, folks. It doesn't exist in official histories, doesn't appear on timelines, even in the archives of the CIA's strangest projects. It lives in footnotes and ambiguous phrasing. But the footprints are still there, smudged across the edges of psychological warfare, embedded in the logic of covert manipulation, echoing in every operation whose perception became more valuable than fact. In the years that followed, similar projects would rise and fall. Remote viewing programs like Stargate, which I heard a great deal about on active duty. PSI research and military think tanks, the study of anomalous cognition by private contractors. But none of them quite touched the fevered edge that MKOften had reached. Because MKOften wasn't just a study, it was a mirror. When it showed what happens when the most powerful intelligence apparatus in the world stares too long into the irrational and sees its own reflection staring back. What survived wasn't data, what survived was the idea that belief, no matter how strange, can be harnessed. And in the right hands, or perhaps the wrong ones, faith could be as dangerous as any bomb. Well, from MKOften, we're going to turn to talk about the shadow that never sleeps. Now, by this point in time, many people claim they've seen it with their own eyes. These weren't just rumors. They were planned, signed, funded, executed. For every operation we've talked about, every false flag, every hidden compartment, every suppressed truth, there are a number we haven't talked about yet. Some are still locked behind black bars of redacted documents. Others are buried in testimony ignored for decades. But one thing is certain, Power, when left unchecked, will always hide behind the excuse of doing it for the greater good. And truth, when inconvenient, will always be the first casualty. The stories I've covered over the last few shows may sound like fiction, but they actually happened. And they raise a deeper question, one that should haunt all of us. If these operations are real, what else might have taken place that we just don't know about? Living in an age of distraction, of white noise, of deliberate confusion. But sometimes the most radical acts is simply paying attention. And if the stories that I've covered have left you disturbed, angry, even a little paranoid, that's not a flaw. It means you're awake and listening. And it doesn't stop there. Well, we're going to be talking about a lot of strange things as this show goes on. We're going to be delving not into government halls or intelligence files, but into the human soul, into the hearts of those who followed a different kind of power. Power not sanctioned by the state, but claimed by prophets and gurus and gods. And when belief turns deadly, the body count climbs just as fast. Well, the interesting thing is when you get to a certain point in the type of research that we do, there's no question that you run into things that just do not make any sense in the way that we are used to dealing with sense. MKOften is a prime example. Who would believe that the CIA, of all groups of people, would try to harness magic to use it in the intelligence field? And some of the projects that have been talked about, sometimes in whispers and sometimes out loud, push the bounds of reality. One prime example is Project Bluebook. Now, while many people discounted the very idea of UFOs, the federal government put together a very expensive program to study them. It began in 1952 and it ran to 1969. It was called the U.S. Air Force Quest for Quality and Clarity. Began in the early years of the Cold War. The U.S. grappled with a surge in unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs as they were referred to. Sightings that sparked both public curiosity and government concern. Amidst fears of Soviet technological advancement and potential aerial threats, the Air Force initiated Project Bluebook, which was described as a systematic effort to investigate, catalog, and understand these enigmatic occurrences. Bluebook became most extensive and enduring of the Air Force's UFO research programs, leaving a lasting legacy on both military protocol and public perceptions of UFO phenomena. It was established in March 1952, succeeding earlier, less formalized efforts to investigate UFO sightings. The inception was a direct response to the increasing number of reports and the growing public and governmental interest in understanding the nature and implications of these unidentified objects. The project was headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, strategic location given its proximity to various military installations and research facilities. Now, according to its original charter, Project Bluebook had three main objectives. Number one, determine if UFOs were a threat to national security. In the context of the Cold War, assessing whether unidentified aerial objects represented potential espionage tools or advanced weaponry from adversarial nations was paramount. Number two, scientifically analyze UFO data. By systematically collecting and examining sightings, Project Bluebook aimed to apply scientific methodologies to categorize and understand the phenomena. Number three, assess public interest and impact. Understanding the public's perception and reaction to UFO sightings helped to manage information dissemination and address societal concerns. Now, Project Bluebook is led by a series of directors over its 17-year span, each bringing different expertise and perspectives. The project comprised of various divisions, including an investigation division, responsible for field investigations, data collection, and preliminary analysis of the sightings. There was a research division focused on scientific analysis and pattern recognition and the hypothesis testing related to UFO phenomena. And the third was the public relations division, managed communication with the media, government officials, and the public, ensuring controlled information flow. Throughout its operation, Project Bluebook investigated thousands of UFO reports, categorizing them based on their nature and likelihood of identification. Now, there were several high-profile cases that were examined in the Project Bluebook, shaping the program's direction and public perception. The first big, or probably one of the biggest, happened in 1953. It was called the Gorman Dogfight, involving a reported aerial engagement between unidentified objects and the F-86 Sabre jets near Gorman, Texas. Multiple witnesses, including military personnel, reported seeing fast-moving objects with unconventional flight patterns. Despite extensive analysis, these objects remain unidentified, fueling speculation about their origins. Then in the 1952 Washington, D.C. UFO incident, a series of radar and visual sightings over the nation's capital prompted heightened airspace security. Multiple pilots and ground observers reported seeing a large silent objects with unusual maneuvers. Project Bluebook concluded the sightings are likely misidentified aircraft or atmospheric phenomena, though public skepticism did continue. See, that's one of the things that Bluebook became known for. If St. Peter appeared in Times Square, it would be explained away as a misidentified natural phenomena. And as long as everybody stuck to the script, the public had no choice but to accept it. Bluebook concluded in regard to all the UFOs seen and photographed over Washington, D.C., misidentified aircraft. Everybody went, oh, yeah, that's what it had to be. Then we got the Levelland lights in 1957. Levelland, Texas. Numerous motorists and police officers reported bright lights moving erratically and causing vehicle malfunctions. Project Bluebook contributed the lights to a combination of natural gas flares and atmospheric conditions, though a lot of people did remain unconvinced of the official explanation. Over its tenure, Project Bluebook analyzed 12,618 UFO reports and categorized them in a very logical to the government's view. 91% were classified as misidentified, were said to be identified. The vast majority were explained as conventional objects or natural phenomena, including aircraft and balloons and clouds and astronomical bodies. 8% were unidentified. A small fraction remained unexplained due to insufficient data or anomalous characteristics that defied conventional identification. And then there was 1% that was classified as no conclusion. Those are the cases where evidence was inconclusive or contradictory, preventing a definitive categorization. Now, Project Bluebook relied on multiple channels to gather UFO reports. Direct submissions, of course. Individuals could submit reports directly to the Air Force via mail or telephone, providing descriptions of sightings and locations and circumstances. Then there were military and civilian observations, reports from military personnel, pilots, and civilian observers who were prioritized due to their trained perspectives and access to restricted airspace. Then there's radar and sensor data. Technological advancements allowed for the incorporation of radar and other sensor data to corroborate the various sightings and analyze object characteristics. And each report underwent a standardized investigation process. The first one was the initial screening, determining the credibility of the report based on the reliability of the witnesses and the clarity of the description. Then there was the data collection stage, gathering all available information, including witness statements and photographs and radar data and environmental conditions. Then there was number 3, the analysis and correlation stage, comparing the sightings with known aircraft movements and weather patterns and astronomical events to identify possible explanations. And then there's the categorization, assigning the sighting to a specific category, identified, unidentified, and no conclusion, blamed on the analysis. Then there was the reporting phase, documenting findings, if necessary, disseminating information to relevant authorities or public channels. Project Bluebook employed scientific principles to ensure objective analysis. It employed empirical evidence, emphasizing verifiable data of anecdotal accounts to maintain analytical rigor. There was peer review, engaging experts from various scientific disciplines to assess and validate the findings. And there was statistical analysis, utilizing statistical methods to identify patterns and trends and correlations within the collected data. Despite its systematic approach, Project Bluebook faced significant criticism and controversy both from within and outside government circles. Critics argued that Project Bluebook served as a facade to downplay the significance of UFO sightings and conceal potential extraterrestrial evidence. Among the allegations that were brought against it, suppressing evidence, claims that incriminating or extraordinary evidence was deliberately withheld from the public to prevent panic or maintain technological secrecy. And there was a claim that the findings are manipulated. Accusations that investigators are instructed to categorize unexplained sightings as mundane phenomena, regardless of the evidence. Well, academic and skeptic critiques highlighted several methodological issues. There was a confirmation bias. Investigators may have been predisposed to dismiss sightings and misidentifications, limiting the scope of analysis. And there were inconsistent standards. Variations in how different cases were evaluated led to inconsistencies in categorization and conclusions. And there was certainly a lack of transparency. Limited access to internal procedures and findings hindered external validation and scrutiny. Well, within the Air Force itself, Project Bluebook faced internal dissent. It was the scientific community's frustration. Scientists involved in the project sometimes felt constrained by bureaucratic pressures to conform to predetermined conclusions. Operational challenges, logistical issues such as resource limitations and communication barriers impeded through investigations of all reported sightings. Project Bluebook's culmination in 1969 marked the end of the Air Force's official UFO investigative efforts, but its legacy continues to influence both government protocol and public discourse on UFO phenomena. The official stance of Project Bluebook concluded that no evidence of extraterrestrial activities existed. They said there was no credible evidence to suggest that UFOs are alien in origin or pose a threat to national security. And then there were a number of misidentifications and natural phenomena brought into play. Most sightings could be attributed to misidentified aircraft and balloons and other phenomena or other explained sources. It encouraged skepticism. The project fostered a climate of skepticism toward UFO reports, emphasizing the importance of empirical evidence and scientific analysis. Now, Project Bluebook set precedents from how governmental bodies approached UFO investigations. Its systematic methods provided a template for future programs and emphasized data collection, analysis, and categorization. And the project's handling of media relations influenced how information about UFO sightings is disseminated to the public, balancing transparency with national security concerns. And Project Bluebook significantly impacted public perception and cultural narratives surrounding UFOs. Despite or maybe because of its conclusions, the project became a focal point for conspiracy theories alleging government cover-ups. The project's existence and eventual termination inspired numerous books and films and television shows exploring themes of extraterrestrial contact and governmental secrecy. By formalizing UFO investigations, Project Bluebook inadvertently legitimized ufology, encouraged the growth of independent research organizations and enthusiasts. The termination of Project Bluebook didn't significantly put an end to UFO investigation, but rather a transition to new approaches. The closure of the project involved archiving and declassifying numerous documents, providing a foundation for future research and public access. Subsequent efforts, such as the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program and the Identified Aero Phenomena Task Force, adopted more intelligence-oriented approaches, focusing on national security implications. In the decades after its closure, Project Bluebook's records became increasingly accessible to the public, facilitating greater transparency and scholarly analysis. Shortly after Project Bluebook's interception, the U.S. Air Force convened the Robertson Panel, a group of scientists tasked with evaluating the threat of UFOs and advising on public policy. This was in 1953. The panel concluded the UFOs did not pose a direct threat, but recommended measures to counteract public panic and reduce the spread of misinformation. This advisory influenced Project Bluebook's public communication strategy. Under the Freedom of Information Act, many Project Bluebook documents were declassified and made available to the public. These archives have been instrumental for researchers and historians and enthusiasts seeking to understand the project's operations and findings. Online repositories host scanned copies of reports and memos and correspondence related to Project Bluebook, enabling widespread access. Academic studies utilize these documents to analyze the project's methodologies and biases and impact on public perception. Well, declassified documents have been featured in various media forums and contributing to ongoing interest and debate about Project Bluebook's conclusions and legacy. Films and television segments often reference Project Bluebook to provide historical context for contemporary UFO sightings. And numerous authors have published works delving into Project Bluebook's records, offering critical analysis and alternative interpretations of the data. And while Project Bluebook is officially recognized for its comprehensive approach to UFO investigations, it has not been free from criticism, not by a long shot. Critics argued that the project was flawed in its execution and objectives, leading to potentially biased or incomplete conclusions. Some scientists have criticized Bluebook for not adhering to strict scientific methodologies, arguing that the project prioritized dismissing sightings over objective analysis. And detractors point out that Project Bluebook often relied on incomplete or secondhand reports, limiting the reliability of its findings. And the project has been accused of exhibiting confirmation bias, systematically favoring explanations that align with conventional understandings and dismissing extraordinary claims without sufficient evidence. And there's been allegations of cover-up and suppression almost from the beginning. Conspiracy theorists assert that Project Bluebook was designed to downplay the significance of UFO sightings and suppress potential evidence of extraterrestrial activity. Accusations include the alleged manipulation or selective reporting of data to support predetermined conclusions, which undermine the project's credibility. Internal conflicts took place, as it does in every organization. Reports of disagreements among Project Bluebook personnel suggest that not all members were in agreement about the project's direction and findings, potentially affecting the consistency and objectivity of investigations. And on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow and talk more about some of the strangest corners of government projects. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.